Looks like Alex is having some trouble getting in. John Steiner, there's a name I haven't seen in a long time.
I'm blessed. I get to see John kind of whenever I want to drive over.
Neighbors.
He's a neighbor.
Nice.
John and Margot.
Okay, we are live on YouTube also. So let's
Get to see John kind of whenever I want to drive over.
very lucky.
Leslie Alden.
Ooh, good fiddle. Hey, Moose.
Hi, Hunter.
Hi, Hunter.
Hey.
Catherine.
Hey,
Hello,
Moose.
hello, hello.
Thanks, y'all, for coming. It's going to be fun.
Hi, Hunter.
Hey, Hunter. Thanks, y'all, for coming. It's gonna be
Shell, in answer to your question, this is none other than David Byrne. Shell, in answer to your question, this is none other than David Byrne.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Living Between Worlds for January 17th, 2024. First time I've said that out loud. I'm Gil Friend, CEO of Natural Logic, and with co-host Ken Homer, we'd like to welcome you to the 5th season of Living Between Worlds, and our special guest, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. Ken, you want to just share the logistics for the call with folks?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. If you don't mind, please turn your camera on. It's really nice to see faces instead of a whole bunch of just names on black backgrounds. So we like to see people's faces. We have a really big crowd today, so please use the chat. Feel free to drop questions in at any time. I'll be monitoring that. Periodically, Hunter will scan through and look for questions to answer. We may or may not do a breakout room, depends on how things are going. We're very fluid in the moment here. If you would like to raise your hand, depending upon the version of Zoom that you have and your the way you've set it up, it's either going to be down at the bottom as a standalone, or it'll be under reactions. Please use the raised hand feature so that we know it puts you in the queue up in the upper left, so we know you're there. And please keep yourself on mute unless you're being called on to talk, so that when we do the post-production here, we don't have any, jumping in while Hunter's talking, so we see their screen. So I think that's it. Gil, is there anything else that I missed?
No, I think that does it. Thank you, Ken, for that. So many of you have been with us on these calls before. Some of you are new. Just by way of background, we began this series in the early days of COVID. I was struck by the congruence of the COVID climate and other messes that we're living in, and the challenge of moving at speed, scope, and scale in the face of what has become called polycrises and metacrises and so forth, which we've called the challenge of living between worlds, and doing that with grace and dignity and power. These 40 sessions, we'll post the archive link in the chat. We've discussed COVID and climate. We've discussed the structural defects of capitalism. We've discussed the places to intervene in the system, tipping points, systems change, thinking, feeling, sentir-pensar, and more. Today, we return to our focus on the climate crisis, and I'm delighted to welcome my friend Hunter Lovins. Hunter, in case you don't know her, don't know how that's possible, but in case you don't, is president of Natural Capitalism Solutions, managing partner of Now Partners, co-founder of Future Economy Forum, professor of sustainable management at Fordham University, chief of impact at Change Finance, and last and certainly not least, a regenerative rancher in Colorado. According to me, she's brilliant. She's feisty, as you'll see. She's outspoken. She's my former faculty partner at Presidio Graduate School MBA program. And most important of all, she's a friend and a trusted colleague and collaborator of many decades. How the call is going to go, we're going to start, Hunter and I will be talking together for a while. Then we will open the conversation to you all, both with raised hands and in the chat. And it's wide open. We'll see where this conversation goes. We may do breakouts, as Ken said, because with so many of you, it's not likely everyone will have a chance to speak on camera. And then we'll either just continue in plenary or come back to plenary. And in the last few minutes, Ken and I will offer some closing remarks and some next steps. Okay, that's where we are. So Hunter, what happened at COP?
In some ways, nothing. In some ways, a hell of a lot. Now partners through our Future Economy Forum put on 65 separate events in 4 venues around Dubai. So we ran our asses off. We had a team of, count us, 5 of us. And so COP went by real fast. The COP, for those of you who don't know, is Conference of Parties. It is the UN's annual exercise in frustration where 190 some, this year I believe it was 7, countries come together in theory to negotiate how to deal with the climate crisis. In fact, they don't. And in fact, they can't. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which set up the COPs, is structured in such a way that any one nation can veto any action. Saudi makes $1 billion a day every day they delay action on climate change. You really think something's going to come out of the COPs? And for better or for worse, this is not my first rodeo. That is the pin from COP 3. That was Kyoto. Yeah, I was at COP in Copenhagen when it visibly failed in front of the whole world. And at the COP in Paris, where Christiana Figueres pulled a rabbit out of a hat, in large part because she spent the year before going round to all of the parties and negotiating what at that point was the only agreement that could be negotiated, which is the individual nationally determined contributions, INDCs. So now, rather than a global agreement to limit greenhouse gas emissions to some set, which had been the Kyoto Protocol, it's like, well, you all tell me what you're going to do. And if you take all of the Paris commitments, the world gets to somewhere around 2.8, 3 degrees C additional warming over what the planet was when we began the industrial age, 280 parts per million. We're now at about 424.
Yeah.
When climate science was, well, climate economics, more to the point, climate science has been around since the late 1800s with Arrhenius, who pointed out if you keep emitting CO2 and other greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, you're going to get a warming planet. Guy named Nordhaus said, well, 2 degrees C is the safe level. By that, he meant limiting warming to 2 degrees C additional would not cripple the economy on some modeling that is wholly counterfeit. That's where the 2 degrees C number comes from, i.e. it is scientifically meaningless. Scientists like Jim Hansen have said 1.5 degree additional warming is the upper limit of safe. And by safe, they mean 50-50 chance we won't have a catastrophe. If I said to you, here, come drive with me, 50-50 chance we won't have a fatal car wreck, but believe you'd drive with Gil. So we are
Who can't offer you better odds?
This year we are nearing the 1.5 threshold. And Hansen has said we will exceed it next year. It was thought we would not exceed it until well into the 2030s. We're here.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
Yeah, Hunter, you said from out of Paris, 2.8 degrees based on those agreements, but that's if countries comply with those agreements, if countries fulfill those plans. Is anybody, country or company, at all on track with their climate commitment?
There actually are a few countries that are getting close. Costa Rica has a shot at meeting its Paris agreements.
The
The rest
Gambia
of the
too, right?
countries, no.
And the Gambia I've heard too, but it's a small player.
It's a small player.
Yeah.
And we are, take your pick. Business as usual before Paris, we were headed for 6 degrees. The belief now is that we're not at risk of 6 degree because of business. It is now cost effective everywhere on Earth to use renewables instead of fossil. And that is in the face of $2.7 trillion in fossil subsidies, and some people say much higher, that are thrown to make the price of fossil look cheaper. I'm a free marketeer. Let's get rid of all subsidies. Let's let these technologies compete in a real market. And then you would see the end of oil. You would see the end of, well, a lot of what is causing the planet now to hit, as Rockstrom has said, 15 tipping points, 9 of which are in motion. We are exceeding the planetary boundaries that Rockstrom and the other scientists warned us we ought not to do. We would solve this problem. We know how to solve the climate crisis at a profit. You do 2 things: stop emitting greenhouse gases largely from fossil fuels, clean up a little bit of industry, and implement regenerative agriculture. You do those 2 things, we can, within some estimates from some scientists at Tufts, 60 to 100 years time, we get back to the 280 to 300 parts per million that we were at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution profitably. So we know how to solve the problem. Did we at COP? No. What we got was the finalization of a loss and damage fund. This is something that the most vulnerable nations have been begging for. This is an issue of climate justice. They are collectively responsible for something like 4% of global emissions, and they are suffering most of the harm. And so the nations of the world pledged $700 million to try to deal with loss and damage. The annual cost is $4 billion a year. So we're nowhere near funding the loss and damage fund. And the money that was put into that is money that was already pledged for development. So did we do any good with that?
Yeah.
And we got this great announcement in overtime, extra innings of a transition away from fossil fueled energy systems. Everyone, yes, we have an end of fossil. No, we don't. By energy systems, what they mean is fossil energy used in power plants. At Glasgow, there was already the agreement to phase out coal. So that's already in place. Petroleum use in power plants is 3% of petroleum use. So again, this is a non-announcement. Like, sorry. What else did we get? The forest people got various recognition of the damage that is happening to forests, the need to stop deforestation. Those are real achievements, and it's worth doing. The real reason to go to COP, I mean, why burn jet fuel to fly halfway around the world to sit in rooms where nothing is going to happen? It is the coming together of the world to talk about climate. So I spent my time with heads of state, with ministers, with CEOs, with heads of NGOs, talking about how do we implement these real solutions. And a lot of good things happened there.
For example, I have a stack of other questions, but I'm right with that one. What resonated in those conversations? What did you find that CEOs and heads of states responded to, not just in their roles, but as live human beings? Where was the juice in those
The
conversations?
juice was in things like a trip out to the desert with a young sheikh who is captivated now by the concept of regenerative agriculture, is astonished that that part of the world used to be grasslands and that it can be again. If you manage grazing animals the way nature managed grazing animals, dense packed because of predators, eat everything in front of them, keep moving until the grass has regrown. They eat everything, they trample what's left, they fertilize what's left behind. They don't come back until the grass regrows. When you manage grazing animals that way, you take enormous amounts of carbon out of the air and put it into the soil, to the point that paper by a guy named Greg Retallack, and I will pull up the reference and put this in the chat box. Retallack showed that 60 million years ago, the Earth was at 1,000 parts per million. When humans entered the picture, we were at 280 parts per million. Where'd the carbon go? It turns out it went into grass and thus into the soil. When an animal nibbles grass, the roots slough polysaccharide sugars. That feeds the microbiological community, particularly the mycorrhizal fungi, that mineralizes the carbon. That's why when the pioneers came across the Great Plains of the United States, they found 10 feet of thick black soil. When an animal nibbles grass, the roots. Now, why am I hearing myself back again? Because somebody's taping. What Retallack shows is that the Earth decarbonized itself. We know how to do this. We can do it again. So as I said, that's half the solution to the global climate crisis. So I met with this young sheikh. He wants to convert Emirati agriculture to regenerative. So we put him together with Vijay Kumar out of India. Vijay runs a thing called community managed natural farming. He's working with 1 million plus poor, largely women Indian farmers, helping them convert from the way they had been doing it, in many cases, the green revolution with high cost fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, to no poisons, entirely organic, using Gabe Brown's 5 principles of minimal disturbance of the soil, living root in the soil year round, cover on the soil year round, diversity of crops, and animal impact. In India, they don't eat the cows, but they need the cows. It is that manure that enables them to make a compost-based fertilizer, a mycorrhizal inoculant. They use only indigenous seed and no poisons. He has tripled productivity, doubled profitability amongst these poor farmers. It's now spreading. And we put Vijay together with Majid, put them together with Helmi Abulesh out of Egypt, Sechem, magnificent program in the Egyptian desert, where they are doing organic biodynamic farming, lifting poor Egyptian farmers out of poverty. They were working with 2,700. We put them together with World Food Program. They're now upping that to 40-some thousand. Built a carbon market scheme with the National Bank of Egypt, the Egyptian stock market, and they're doing south-south carbon transfers. And by the by, if any of you want to offset your carbon, this is, for my money, the best carbon offset in the world. And I will pop up in the chat how you do that. So it's putting these kinds of people together, again, human to human interactions. Odie says that cow farts are an important release of CO2. Not quite. It's a release of methane, and it's more the cow burps. If you leave cows on grass, they have their heads down eating. In the grass is methanotropic bacteria, so the methane is eaten by the bacteria. The problem arises when you go to industrial agriculture, take the cows off grass, put them in feedlots, feed them corn and soy grown at great carbon intensity, energy intensity, chemical intensity. They were never designed to eat corn and soy. They get sick, so we load them with antibiotics. We eat the meat, we get sick. This is spherically senseless. It's stupid no matter which way around you look at it. Again, if we go to regenerative agriculture, we solve all of those problems together. There's a new set of films coming out shortly from a guy at Arizona State named Peter Byck, B-Y-C-K. The series of films is Roots So Deep You Can See the Devil Down There. He took 5 sets of farms, 1 regenerative, 1 industrial, put hordes of scientists out on the land for 4 years, studying everything from CO2 equivalent gas releases, so CO2, methane, oxides of nitrogen, health of the land, carbon in the soil, health of the animals, health of bird populations, health of insect populations, profitability of the farms, and showed that you get a massive net sequestration of greenhouse gases on the regenerative side. Interestingly, you actually get some sequestration on the industrial side because, again, these cows are on grass. But when you manage them holistically, the work of Alan Savory, this is such a net sequesterer of carbon that if we were to do this on all the world's grasslands, 60 to 100 years' time, we get back to 280 to 300 parts per million. Very, very hopeful.
Helpful, enormously important, something most people don't know about because, most of the public talk about carbon capture and sequestration is about large high-tech industrial systems that existing fossil fuel companies can adapt to. It's not about regen agriculture. You've got the industrial agriculture system in place, parallel to what you talked about, the Saudis making $1 billion today on drilling. So how does this all shift when there's such a consolidated body of vested interest in the way we've done it? And the new things that you're talking about, which to me are thrilling, echoes my ancient background in sustainable ag. But these are little pieces all over the place, gradually getting stitched together one by one in these face-to-face conversations, arguably the way change really happens. But how does it scale and displace the existing game?
That is the question, isn't it? And what's really clear is it won't happen at the COPs. So a group of us are working. I was asked by a very senior UN official to help him create an alternative, help him implement, he's already created it, an alternative to the COPs. This is still in stealth, so I'm not going to talk a great deal about it. But our tagline is, but what can I do? I'm just one person.
Yeah.
Said 8 billion people.
Yeah.
And clearly we need an alternative mechanism. So a group of us around the world are in the process of trying to put this together. Watch this space.
Excellent.
The other half, of course, is market mechanisms if we let them work. Dr. Mark Jacobson at Stanford has shown that we could be, by 2035, 100% renewably powered with a 6-year payback. And if any of you don't know Mark's work, just Google Dr. Mark Jacobson. Brilliant science showing what it is that we need to do on the energy side.
Mark has done a country-by-country analysis for
137 countries,
which represent more than 95% of global emissions, 6-year payback, so call it 17, 18% ROI, which you cannot get legally anywhere else. The budget for this is about $65 trillion over the next, several decades, which sounds like a lot of money. But McKinsey says that's the budget to sustain the fossil fuel industry over the same period of time. So, you want to put the 65 trillion here, or do you want to put the 65 trillion here? I don't know. I'm just 8 billion people. What do I know? It's a great
Yes.
line. So stepping away from the physical details for a second and back to COP. COP, you said, is crippled by being a consensus process.
It is not a consensus process.
Okay.
Were it a consensus process whereby the overwhelming consensus would rule, it is a one country can veto everything process. That's a little different.
Any prospects for that ever changing, or do we need to just build another show somewhere else, as you're talking about doing?
Good question.
I mean, some people have suggested that, what if the 10 most significant emitters in the world got together and said, we're going to do this. Y'all follow us or not? Make any sense?
Yes, this is a approach put forth first by Steve Rayner at Oxford, who said the Kyoto process was flawed from the get-go by having to have every nation at the table. And so, yes, if the major emitters got together and said, right, here's what we're going to do, that would be a big difference. Is that going to happen at a COP? No, that will take something else. If any of you follow the writings, the speakings of Antonio Guterres at the UN, the head of the UN, he is apoplectic at how little progress we're making. And so it is possible that the UN could dig its head out. I'm part of several groups that are looking at how do we reform the COP process. The Club of Rome, Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, who's co-president of the Club of Rome, has been leading this effort for some time. Johan Rockström, the great climate scientist, is working on this as well. We had this conversation at COP, so it'll be interesting to see. But myself, I think it's going to take moving outside of the COP process and going to all of the people of the world and saying, let's do this together.
Maybe we go both ways. We go to all the people in the world and say, I'm just one person and 8 billion of us. And we try to get the United States and China and Europe, EU, in some way to take a step together. Not easy to do, but if that happened, wouldn't that tip the game?
I think so.
Yeah.
So as I say, I'm hinting at what it is we're doing, but watch this space.
Yeah. One more question for me, then we'll open the room. I just did a piece last week, I don't know if you saw it, saying, well, COP doesn't really matter. And of course it does, for all the reasons that you say, but from, you early on cited the importance of the business world and the innovations that are happening on the ground in business. And if I'm advising a business client, I'm saying to them, don't track the COP any more than you would track the regulations, track the living principles of the living world, how things work on this planet. You know what the roadmap is. The roadmap is renewable and edible and cyclical. It's regenerative. Do that as fast as you can, faster than the regulators want, faster than your customers want, and faster than your competitors might be doing. So from that perspective, COP doesn't matter at all. Yes or no?
Sort of.
Okay.
I'm about to put into the chat a series of articles that I wrote leading up to and at COP on what is and is not happening there.
Great.
As many of you know, years ago, gosh, almost 40, we created a little group called Rocky Mountain Institute on the thesis that we could work with the business community. And it was very much in the interest of the business community to implement more regenerative practices, to behave more responsibly to people and planet. Yes, that's true. And it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
We wrote Natural Capitalism in '99. At that point, we were kind of going on guts. Like, really, really believe us, there's a business case here. 2005, Flammer showed that the companies that are behaving more responsibly are outperforming. By 2019, even Larry Fink was on board. A year or so later comes the framing of ESG. Now you have the backlash and all these companies are going, oh, excuse us, we didn't really mean that. And if I look back over my history of book after book after bloody book after consulting, at one point, Natural Capitalism Solutions was consulting for companies representing something like 3% of US GDP. I've consulted for most of the big companies. Many of you on the call do this as your bread and butter activities. We've failed. According to the scientists, we're losing. And yeah, one of you put in that Hansen thinks we're going to hit 350 by this May, likely. So what then? And literally about 2 years ago, I was going to hang up my spurs. I was going to quit.
And do what?
Ride my horse, watch an eagle fly.
Yeah.
Retire.
Yeah.
I had sat on the board of a brilliant little battery company, which had exited happily, and this astonishing amount of money landed in my bank account. It's like, whoa, I learned something. I've always sat on nonprofit boards.
Yeah.
Sit on for-profit boards. They have stock options.
Yeah. I'm doing
And
more
my
of that.
husband's been after me to retire. And so I thought, you add up everything I do. Is it enough? No. Do I know what enough is? No. Then why go down the road? Why burn carbon? And so I was going to hang up my spurs.
And so why didn't you?
Because a very senior official at the UN, whom I had fought for 2 years prior as part of a UN program, gave a speech on regenerative agriculture I could have given. I thought, well, so I walked up to him, stuck out my hand, said, howdy, my name's Hunter Lovins. He laughed. He said, I know who you are. Like, yeah, probably so, huh? I gave him heartburn for 2 years. I said, I may have been wrong about you. And we sat down and talked, and he pitched me. I thought, okay, that's big.
Yeah.
It's too big. I have no idea how to do it, nor do I know anybody who could. If it could be done, yes, that would be enough. So I shrugged and went on to my next gig. He showed up there. We wound up, for some silly reasons, 7 hours on a bus crossing Italy. I had no agenda. We were just riding down the miles. We were both telling war stories. And somewhere in the middle of Italy, I thought, son of a bitch, he can do it. And he looked at me and said, will you join me? And I looked at him and I said, I will ride for your brand. I said, you have no earthly idea what I just said, but let's go. And since then, so now I just have to go raise. We are variously told we need $2 million, $5 million, $30 million to pull this off. So yeah, I'm in fundraising mode. It's a little hard though to raise money when you say to somebody, I can't tell you who's involved and I can't tell you what we're going to do, but trust me, it's big.
There's times for that. You know, I take some comfort in the realization that I really don't know how this change happens. This is not like cause and effect like billiard balls, you know, and we are falling behind and yet we're having impact. I mean, that guy who gave the speech that you could have given might have seen something that you said or that some of your colleagues said. And so the influences ripple slowly and gradually. We've had sessions in the past about tipping points, which I don't think is a mechanistic magic number that if you hit a certain percentage, things flip over. But we do know that change is discontinuous and that things look stuck and look stuck and look stuck, and then suddenly they move. And so for me, that's what fuels me, and just continuing to do the pieces that I can do as just one of the 8 billion of us, hoping to have little inroads here and there and occasionally getting some feedback from somebody that had actually made a bit of a difference. Hunter,
the one thing I'd caution you on is the Martin Luther King quote. This is not the time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to go hard.
Going hard, ride hard.
So that's what I'm doing.
That's why we're all here. Thank you. We've got a bunch of hands up. Let's take some
let's go.
Conversation from the room. Mark, then Jane, then Shams, then George. A reminder again, if you want to speak, raise your hand. If you have questions and don't want to speak, stick them in the chat. We'll handle as many of them as we can. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm looking at it from an economic point of view and a technology point of view, and um, and we're a two-person startup, but the technology core of the startup is a guy who got a patent for 22.5% efficient solar thin film in 1983, when the violet film that NASA was paying $100 a watt for was 14%. So we're in the same ball game again. We're looking at 41% efficiency on thin film and 2 to 5 kilowatt hours per kilogram efficiency on batteries, and dirt cheap prices. And in the United States, we got the IRA, which slashes 30% off the cost of the solar and $45 a kilowatt hour off the price of batteries. So we can go into extreme expansion mode because of the disruptive economics here, as well as the disruptive technology. And I figured, just doing spreadsheets on how fast we could add factories, which are ceramic tile factories, mature product. We could get rid of fossil fuels by 2030, and we could get trucks and buses cleaned up by that time too. Maybe it might take till 2032 to really finish the job on fossil fuels, but we could do most of it. And the profits from this can not only fund the sales of the technology, but they can also fund sales of or purchases by communities of the technologies they need to transform their economies beyond energy and beyond transportation, which we've got covered.
The rolling forward of technology is one of the more exciting things that's happening. The Chinese are about to sweep the world with cheap electric vehicles. I drove to my office here in a Leaf. I love EVs. I love passing a gas station and not having to stop in. I fuel the Leaf off the solar panels at the ranch. When we have power outages, well, what problem? Have a heat pump on the ranch. We were comfortable through minus 10 2 days ago. These technologies work. They're here. They're now. Let's use them.
Yeah,
So,
and with the IRA, with that $45 a kilowatt hour, the average price of batteries today it was recently 134, and someone just said it was down to 114. So 114 minus 45 is like 60 something, but $60 a kilowatt hour pilot plant wholesale price, which is what I was planning, minus 45 is $15 a kilowatt hour. That means that you can put all the batteries you want into any project. And I saw somebody suggesting that cost effective wise, somebody just said that or wrote that if you let's say you put in 3 days worth of solar, and you put in or 3 to 5 days worth of batteries, or you just put in plenty of solar in 3 to 5. Oh, that was it. It was plenty of solar enough solar for winter.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 to 5 days of battery storage would basically take you off the grid.
Yes, 4 days is the canonical number. Australia's doing this. Hawaii just closed down its last coal plant, put in a big battery. We know how to solve the energy crisis just through wind, water, solar. This is Mark Jacobson's work. We got plenty of technologies now. If yours come aboard, bueno. So again, thanks for what you're doing. Jane.
It's a thrill to see a rancher fresh from COP28 talk about deep soil and punching cattle in the right way. And it's kind of amusing to think of cowgirls and cowboys kind of taking the place of the old predators, the great predators of the grasslands. Maybe we'll get there again someday. I'm picking up off of China, and I wonder if you've heard discussions, some of them disturbing, and I can't tell how much of it is propaganda, of Chinese interests buying up huge amounts of American farm and ranch land, particularly ranch lands that are close to military-owned properties in the United States. But I wonder at the prospects of if this land is bought and agriculture is engaged in, whether a country that's notable for having the only nation in the world with a Department of Ecology would become farmers in the United States and regenerative ranchers.
No. The Chinese are very smart. The Chinese have written into their constitution that they will be the ecological civilization. They are the largest deployer of renewable energy around the world. They deploy every year more than the rest of the world combined. And no, that's not the reason they're buying up land. Now, I used to spend, before COVID, I spent a fair amount of time in China working with a number of people there. It's gotten a whole lot more difficult, and the Chinese are back now on a hegemonistic agenda. So no, I would not trust the Chinese to be better farmers than the young people of the US. And what we ought to be doing is buying up land and enabling young people to become regenerative farmers. I will go tonight to a meeting of Soil. Woody Tash created slow opportunities for investing locally. There's a group of us in the Boulder Valley who each put in $300 some a year. Some people put in more. We meet once a month and give loans to people who are doing regenerative agriculture at zero interest to enable this to spread in our neighborhood.
True patronage of the future.
Yeah, I like your model better than Bill Gates investing in farmland.
Yeah, actually, it's between the Chinese and Bill. I might take the Chinese, but yes, we do need to pay attention to our land. Was on a webinar this morning of a thing called Beyond Bretton Woods that I serve on. This is a group of people trying to rethink the Bretton Woods financial institutions. Brilliant guy out of Africa who has done a book on the just transition, talking about how Africa is still being colonized by the companies from the North who come in and say, oh, we're going to give you jobs to make stuff that then gets exported to the North, or agricultural interests to grow things to get exported to the North. And as a result, Africa imports all of its oil, essentially all of its food, essentially all of everything else that it uses. And this goes back, in fact, Moose Schuman is on this call. Michael Schuman, who is the master of local economic development. How do you, and if you guys aren't, you should subscribe to his Main Street Journal. Here's how you do real economic development: by enabling people in communities to own their own businesses, to produce for food sovereignty, to produce as much stuff as you can locally, to ensure that you get a net economic gain out of any investment that comes into your community. The stuff we did years ago with the Economic Renewal Project. Michael has all of these books. Go to your favorite local bookstore and buy Michael Schuman's books on economic development. This is what we need to be doing in this country, and indeed in developing countries.
And from that perspective, the potential for Africa is huge. Africa's seen, from a local economic development perspective, the resources that are there, the population and growth, level of education, which is uneven, but the Africans that I've met who are educated are brilliant and full of fire about a creative future for that continent. So yes, indeed. Michael Schuman, do you want to add anything at this point?
Yeah, Moose, jump in.
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, the one thing I would add to this is the incredibly important role of finance. And we have talked about all of the technological opportunities and policy opportunities and desubsidization opportunities. But if we want to move this faster, we've got to shift our investment. And my guess is that if we did an informal survey in this call, we would find that maybe 1% of the people on the call were putting as at least 1% of their money into local economic development. Almost everyone else is fully invested in Wall Street. So shifting small percentages of our capital as fast as possible in any way as possible is pretty critical to turning things around.
Michael, thanks. Very specific. Shams and then George.
Hello, Gil, Hunter, thank you so much. You're so such dynamic forces in remediating especially our energy conundrum. I wanted to segue from this other aspect that's been touched on, regenerative agriculture and local community development, to raise a kind of perhaps a somewhat disruptive question here, but what if what underlies climate change, diversity loss, and our other crises fundamentally is our outsized footprint and planetary overshoot, which is now 1.7 planets per year? So
you know why? Do you know where that math comes from?
Wait, one more thought.
Do you know why? Do you know what the overshoot is?
One more thought. So in that context, and I want to hear what you have to say, but providing less deleterious sources of energy, the renewables, and this is rarely talked about, have themselves quite high footprint costs, resource costs, to enable the world to continue more or less pretty much to continue to turn as it has, including rapacious direct destruction of the environment, of ecosystems, is not, in that sense, a solution. What seems to me to be required is reducing consumption, waste, and population. That where the footprint lies in human behavior. Okay, Hunter, I want to hear from you.
Well, I wanted to hear from you. You talked about the overshoot. What is most of that overshoot? Have you looked into those numbers?
Yes, I have. But
what is it?
What is
it? Material consumption? Is it mining? Is it farming? Where does that so-called overshoot come from?
That's a good question. I'm not prepared.
It comes from carbon emissions. Essentially, all of the overshoot, fair enough. Mathis Wagernackel, Bill Rees, who put forth the concept of global footprint, of overshoot, have a point. But if you take away the carbon emissions, we're not in overshoot at all. And the recent UN numbers, fertility rates are decreasing at a rate that's actually concerning to a lot of countries. They're saying, wait, we're losing our demographics.
Yeah, I know that.
And so the population problem will take care of itself. And this has always been true. Assuming that we had ever-growing population, it would take care of itself through misery. Not a good answer.
Yeah.
It is taking care of itself because, women are waking up. They're realizing that more kids is not an answer to what do I do in my old age. They're moving to cities. In cities, you tend to have fewer kids. Women are getting jobs. And if we want to help with dropping the population to zero population growth, and I served on the board at ZPG for a while, do things like Ashok Khosla in India, where he works with poor women, helping them get jobs in green technologies. When they have a job, they delay pregnancy until they're 29, 30. That erases 6, 8, 10 generations. Help women have, first of all, and this is the work of Malcolm Potts at University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. If you do 5 things, feed people, so end hunger, reform land tenure. This is the work of Hernando de Soto, Mystery of Capital, educate people, particularly women, provide information about and access to contraception, population automatically goes to ZPG and stays there.
Mhm.
We can solve the population crisis, if we think there is one, very humanely, just through, and in many cases, just educating women. That, by the way, is also one of the best economic development answers out there.
Thank you. I'm going to get off, but I just want to leave you with one question. Are you saying that the large impact of energy use on overshoot is not because of extraction of resources?
Correct. Correct. It is not
What was
because of
driving-
extraction.
It's
If
driving-
you, again, let me see if I can pull up the exact reference to this. It was a BBC article a few years back that actually looked into why is it that we are in overshoot, and it's carbon emissions. So solve the climate crisis, the so-called overshoot goes away. Now, I am not saying everybody run out, jump on Timu or whatever this stupid program is, and order everything that you can lay your hands on, and that's the answer to happiness. Reducing our load on the earth would be a good thing. Using resources dramatically more productively is a very good thing. It enables us to buy time. Energy efficiency, material efficiency, circularity, the circular economy is a very good thing. And by the way, one of the better ways of slowing the climate crisis. Using approaches like biomimicry, manufacturing everything the way nature does. This is Janine Benyus's great brilliance. Managing all institutions to be regenerative of human and natural capital. These are the core principles of natural capitalism. They are still true. They're still better business than the way most businesses conduct themselves. But yes, the overshoot comes from carbon emissions. So let me go see. George, while you ask your question, let me see if I can find. Oh, where would it be?
Okay, well, Amory Lovins used to talk about 90% of everything that we buy goes into the dump within 6 months, and about
More than that, but yes.
40% of the food we grow is waste, is never eaten by anybody except microbes. So a lot of what we have in terms of overshoot is actually waste. I looked at a Swedish environmental institute, a COP28 post-match analysis, and I was really impressed by one person, Ricardo Marshall from Barbados, who is a representative of the small island nations, really somebody to watch out for. And another thing that came through was the like-minded developing countries, LMDCs, which are Algeria, Bangladesh, Belarus, Bhutan, China, Cuba, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Syria, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. And according to one of the panelists at that Swedish Environmental Institute talk after COP28, they said that the LMDCs were not willing to engage in a conversation about development goals during the first week of negotiations. So I'm interested in the different groups at COP, like the small island nations, who are on the real front line. So they're serious. And things like these LMDCs, like-minded developing countries, the different cliques and clacks that are moving in COP. And if you can say something about that.
Yes. When you get into the world of the UN, there is this alphabet soup of acronyms, of bingos and engos and ringos, and on. There are lots of different groupings trying to grapple with this, trying to deal with the fact that the UNFCCC framework doesn't allow conversation about what really matters, i.e., how the hell do we get away from emitting all of the fossil greenhouse gases that we are now. And literally at most of the discussions at COP, we're arguing over where to place the comma and the brackets. Brackets are around text that's not agreed to. We pretty much negotiated everything that could be negotiated at Paris. So unless you really wholly reframe the discussion, it's going to go nowhere. At this COP, when Sultan Al Jaber, the president, the UAE president of the COP, who is also the head of the Emirates National Oil Company, ADNOC, mansplained to Mary Robinson, saying there was no scientific evidence of a need to transition away from oil and gas, the small island nations damn near walked out. It was this close. Many of us were kind of hoping they would leave because that would break the whole thing apart. It's, on the other hand, in many ways, the COP is the only thing we have so far. Again, watch this space. It's the only time all of us come together. And it would have been a massive international crisis. Now, the small island nations, the High Aspiration Coalition, the countries that want to put in place a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, they are continuing to agitate for a different form of the COP and a different rule set. We'll see where we get to. But it is a fascinating process to observe. There is a guy named Ed King, by the way. I think if you Google him, you'll find his blogs. He did a daily blog on what's happening, what's not happening at COP. I tried to get him to publish with Climate and Capital Media, which is where I'm publishing these days, and he wanted to keep doing his own blog. But if you really want to get into who's who in these processes, that would be the best blog to follow. Again, Ed King.
We've got 5 more hands queued up. I noticed that none of them are of the female persuasion, which is kind of interesting. I invite people who haven't spoken.
I think I may be dominating that category.
Well, there's room for more. So we've got another half hour. If you'd like to share your thoughts, please get your hand up into the queue, Don. And then
okay.
Louis.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you for all of the wonderful work you have done and continue. And don't hang up your boots for a long time. I grew up on a ranch in North Dakota, and I know about wearing boots. But I only wanted to say 2 things because I've got another meeting in just a minute. I put in the chat that the net increase in the human population is 83 million annually. And that isn't trivial as a driver. That's one of the elephants in the house, if you want to call it that. And so often, and you too, have totally overlooked the role of geothermal, and we are underutilizing geothermal globally. There are thousands of places where we can tap into geothermal. And thirdly, we're wasting 35% of our food. As an agricultural worker and a net regenerative agriculture, there's much more like that, but I must go. I've got another meeting now. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being with us. You're spot on about geothermal. Google did a study a couple of years back, showed there is more capacity for cost-effective geothermal under West Virginia than there is coal resources. Geothermal is another one of the renewables that has an enormous amount of potential.
Okay.
Yeah, but as with carbon capture, the question isn't just what resources are they and where are they, it's who owns them.
It's also what does it cost?
Well,
Carbon capture is extraordinary. Well, unless you're doing regenerative agriculture, carbon capture.
Well, let me
mechanical carbon capture is horribly expensive to
Hunter,
capture 0.01% of emissions.
let me continue the thought. Yes, that's true, but there are certain players who make money at that, who are different players than make money at the other things. Different folks make money on coal than geothermal. There may be an overlap there. So, it's not just a question of what are the economic analyses, it's who does the counting.
Very good point.
And who counts up the gold. And so back to your point about the soil fund in Colorado, not just looking at farming practices, but looking at ownership of land. We're turning an increasing amount of our work on the ownership of companies, not just, not employee engagement, employee enrichment, but employee ownership. How do you share the value with the people who create the value? And that produces a different decision matrix than, I got $1 billion a day coming in from drilling oil versus Mark Jacobson's compelling economics or something different. But that doesn't speak to Sheikh Al-Jabbar and MBS and those in the same way it speaks to you and I.
The same problem comes up with solar. Who owns the solar? Are we doing big utility-owned solar, or are we doing rooftop solar? Rooftop solar, you own it. Well, if you buy it yourself,
yeah.
If you let the no money down folks put it up, then they own it.
Yeah.
So, back to Michael Schumann's work, who owns stuff? This will determine a lot of who makes the decisions on this.
This is a question.
Ken, on food waste in restaurants in California and now in Colorado, a guy named Anthony Mint, Zero Food Waste, is working with restaurants to put a 1% opt-in extra charge on your bill that pays to collect food waste from restaurants, compost it, and get it to regenerative farmers. So again, a lot of very good solutions around food waste.
Absolutely. Lewis, and then Brent. And let me, since we've got less than a half hour left, let me ask people, keep your comments for questions concise so we can give as many of you as possible a chance to talk.
Thank you very much. If Michael Schumann is still around, he might address this. Your points on who owns it and individual money coming in, it is critically important. I'm always curious, what do people on the right say to that who in this country, I realize I'm narrowing it for a moment, but I'm just curious if there's any interaction, since owning resources is a bedrock of capitalism, and yet that seems to go by the wayside when you talk to those folks.
Well, I'll just quickly say that a lot of conservatives are very supportive of local investment and new ownership schemes. The crowdfunding reforms that were introduced by Congress in 2012 were led by Patrick McHenry, who you may recall was briefly the head of the House during the Republican upheaval. And the Republicans have been far more supportive of crowdfunding reform than Democrats have. That's another discussion. On ownership, there is an interesting bill pending that Marco Rubio has co-authored with Democrat Chris Van Hollen around co-ops and other forms of ownership as a way of getting us more invested in our community. So I think this track is a really good way of building a left-right coalition that we're looking for.
Brent, welcome. You're on mute, Brent. Oh, we've lost you. There you go.
There we go. There we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, I work in energy in the built environment. I was actually inspired into this industry 25 years ago by a visit to the Aspen headquarters. And I was interested in hearing your thoughts about the role that that aspect of the problem in your mind plays into what we're facing going forward. The very recent focus on electrification of the of buildings is, you know, this is something that has really taken the industry by storm in the last few years. I think it is the other half of our adaptation to high penetration of renewable energy, not only the ability to use that electricity, but also to manage our demand for that electricity, to so that we're matching our patterns of consumption to the patterns of availability. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts about where you see that now, where you see that going, and how you see that stacking up relative to some of the other areas. You know, EVs get all of the attention. Renewable generation gets all of the attention. I see buildings as sort of being underloved, perhaps, and efficiency being less focused on. Be interested to hear your perspective.
I was once talking with Dana Meadows, Donella Meadows, our generation's greatest writer, thinker on many of these issues. And I said, you know, RMI is all about efficiency. But if we keep doing more and more and more and buying more and more and more and growing the population more and more and more, don't we just eat up all the efficiency? And she said, if the real role of efficiency is to buy time. And I thought, yeah, in the book, Natural Capitalism, we had 4 principles: efficiency, biomimicry, the solutions economy, and Dave Brower's CPR, conservation, preservation, restoration. I've changed those principles to make them verbs. So the first principle is buy time by using all resources dramatically more productively. 2, redesign how we make and deliver all products and services using approaches like biomimicry and the circular economy. And 3, manage all institutions to be regenerative of human and natural capital. Buildings are, depending on how you count them, 40% of our carbon emissions. Let's get buildings right. And we, again, know how to do this. And there's so much good work on that. Oh, there's a book, but it's way over there. Green Building, Integrating Ecology and Real Estate, that I helped write many years ago. And we laid out all the principles of green building, and people like you, Bob Berkebile, all the great green building experts, David Johnston, who tragically just died. We should be doing this simply as a matter of good building practice. Some places are now starting to require it. California has had several good pieces of legislation. There is no excuse for building a building that needs external energy to heat or cool it. Buildings should keep themselves, well, the building doesn't care. The building should keep the people in them comfortable year round just through good design. So it's a very, very important area. When, by the way, you do this, you have a more delightful experience of being in the building. When you have good lighting, you can see what you're doing. When you have good acoustics, you can hear yourself think. Green buildings are just more pleasant to be in. And again, where this has been done, you get up to 16% higher productivity from things like good lighting, good air quality. Do you know that in most buildings, CO2 concentration is 1,000 parts per million? I was at COP with a guy who had a little CO2 monitor, and he kept posting it around. I was like, shit, here we are talking about CO2, and we're inside buildings where we're poisoning ourselves.
1,000 ppm is standard of practice.
Yep.
Standard
and that is, you're making yourself stupid at higher concentrations of CO2. So yeah, buildings is very important. Mark, you're spot on. High performance cement. I'm in a battle here with Cemex cement plant. It emits, 470,000 tons of CO2 every year. It's operating under outdated permits. Nasty sort of plant. We're trying to shut it down. And Cemex itself is moving to much lower emission cement making. Again, we know how to do all this stuff. Let's just do it.
You know how
Leslie,
to-
yes, Marin County has been leading on many of this stuff for years.
Stuart, before I go to you, just want to say on the matter of the buildings, Contra, as you know, I spent 5 years as the chief sustainability officer for the city of Palo Alto, and a good part of the job was working with the building department to shift the permitting. We had the most advanced building standards in the state of California, which is arguably one of the most advanced in the country. And man, it was like pulling teeth to get anything done. The friction in the bureaucracy, that we've always done it this way. The requirements from the state of California that we demonstrate that every code element was cost effective, when a lot of them were effective in synergy with others, but you had to analyze them one by one by one. Enormous hurdles that took, a lot of will to push through. Most jurisdictions don't have that will. And so the innovations from the early adopters, Boulder would be one, Berkeley another, some in New York, that set the proof case that this can be done economically, all the benefits of green building that you talked about. But this is sort of the hidden part of the challenge, is grinding through the bureaucracy to shift the rules of the game behind the scenes.
The building industry is innovation hostile, sadly.
Well, a lot of industries are, and a lot of governments are. I mean, look, if you're in a city government, you are highly risk averse. You have long planning cycles where everything needs to be vetted carefully. You're planning 2 or 3 years ahead on things that are changing every 6 months. It's a problematic process, and that's maybe the topic for another call. Let me go to Stuart, and then Alan, and then Sarah, and we're going to come into the home stretch here.
Great, Gil. Thank you for teeing up what I wanted to talk a little bit about, or have Hunter talk a little bit about. I appreciate all of the incredible scientific and technical advancements and solutions and focus. What I'm thinking about, though, is the human element. When we talk about food waste and things ending up in the dumpster 6 months after purchase, I'm wondering, Hunter, if there is any conversation around the element of human change, human adaptation, humans thinking and being a little bit different. And the second part is my concern that it seems that so many of the advancements are imposed or talked about in the context of a traditional capitalist model. And we know the kind of havoc that has created on the planet. And I'm wondering if there's any thought about that aspect of the solutions that you're talking about.
Yeah, how do we make people smarter in a hurry? And
thank you, because we have an epidemic of stupidity.
we do. It is the arguably the most common element in the universe.
We got some folks who are committed to manufacturing stupidity. That's one of our other challenges.
We do seem to do that well. We capitalism, I've spent my life trying to reform capitalism, trying to make us actually implement capitalism. What we have now is Randy Hayes calls cheater capitalism. We socialize the harms and privatize the gains. And it would be nice if we tried real capitalism. I wrote a paper, which was, where the hell was it published? Some book or other, on the economics you didn't learn in high school, but going back to Adam Smith, Pareto, Ricardo, and looking at what they actually said. And it turns out much of what they are quoted as saying they didn't, or they used it as a throwaway line, like Adam Smith's invisible hand. He never put any real stock in that. Ricardo, if capitalism is to work, capital has to be locally bounded, i.e. by nations. Companies have to be chartered by the nation. If capital is mobile, Ricardo was very clear, you're not trading to comparative advantage, you're trading to absolute advantage. So yes, it would be really nice to have real capitalism. In the book Natural Capitalism, I believe it was chapter 13, we walked through what you have to have real capitalism, a real market, and then all the reasons why we have none of that. So what we have are very powerful market mechanisms. And yes, the work of some of the better economic thinkers, Kate Raworth talking about donut economics, Marianne Mazzucato. My favorite on this, by the way, is John Fullerton's Regenerative Capitalism paper that you all really ought to read, where he lays out the 8 principles of what does it mean to be regenerative, and then how would we organize capitalism around these principles. I don't think we're going to make people any smarter. We're going to get to work with the people we have. Yeah, and you don't start by calling them stupid. And the work that I'm doing now is going to people the world around and saying, how would you solve the climate crisis in your community? And how can I help? And building the global capacity to do just that. And begin coming at this, as opposed to COP, Conference of Parties, coming at this from the bottom up, of empowering people the world around to solve the crises in their own way, in their own community. This, I believe, will happen much faster than any agreement we'd ever hope to get out of the UN. And as I said, I just need to raise a few millions to get this sucker off the ground.
Well, let's talk about that more. Lots to say about the topic of capitalism, which I hyphenate these days. We did a call a couple of years back about the structural defects of capitalism that I think none of the reform efforts, including John's, Fullerton's, fully address. And diagnosis, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So I'm putting a lot of attention at a really clear-eyed diagnosis of what do we need to do to shift that. But more on that another time. I want to give a chance for these last 3 hands up for some quick comments, and then we'll wrap. Ellen, Sarah, and Stuart. And Greg, if we have time, we'll get you too. We'll see if that works. Alan Haber.
Unmute. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And let me ask you all, please be concise. We don't have a lot of time left here.
Yeah, well, concise is always a problem. As a anti-war activist, I raised the question, how does this, and I like the idea of the transition coming from the bottom up, participatory democracy, the commons and all that. But we live in a system of full spectrum domination by the Pentagon, by $900 billion of federal money taken out of the people, and by a pipeline politics that has the centers of power around the current energy system and the military pretty much in place. And is it possible for these endeavors to actually function from the bottom up without actually engaging the war system and the politics of oil and so on in the Middle East and other areas of the world? These questions have not been part of the conversation here at all. And in some way, I'm delighted.
Whoops. Alan, you've frozen. We'll go on to Sarah and come back to you if you come back. Sarah, go ahead. And good to see you.
Causes of environmental devastation, human devastation. We all ought to be doing everything we can to bring an end to the conflict in the Middle East and conflict everywhere. Every time you engage in war, it is a failure of human imagination, and let's stop it. Now, exactly how do you do that? Yeah, that gets a little trickier.
Okay, so speaking about imagination, okay, I come from the background of ecology and education. And I really, truly believe, and I have this written out mostly now in the chat, because I wasn't sure I would even get a chance to speak, that changing our perspectives on the earth and our role in it can truly become much more efficient in many ways, we're all talking about dealing with changes from the top. And I truly believe that children are much more open to change than adults, and parents are much more open to change when their children are teaching them rather than when government is trying to force restrictions on them. And children, I mean, and that involves a special kind of education with children also, where you're not coming from the top down. You are helping them, you're guiding them into discovering the truths about the environment, about the planet, about our role in it, without telling them what they should be doing. They will learn, they will know. We have many kids killing each other, upset, on drugs, because of a situation where they feel helpless. And
yes, all of that is true. And this is very much the theory of change on which the work that I'm doing now is based. Let's trust people, let's empower them, let's enable them, and let's collectively solve the climate crisis.
Very good. Thank you, Hunter and Sarah. Stuart.
Stuart, hey.
Hey.
Long
Hi there,
time no
Hunter.
see.
Yeah, long time. Good to see you. And again, Gil, thank you for creating the community forum you have, and even naming it Living Between Worlds, because by implication, that means our role is to build the bridges, right? And I see no other way for the communion we're talking about without each of us sort of giving up our sacred cows and being able to sit in dialogue with people we don't immediately agree with. And I go back to the compass needle that I think, Hunter, you and Amory named way back with that simple, I still have it, that magnetic thing on the back of my car, abundance by design. And you mentioned it, this is a supreme design challenge. And I guess what I'd like to offer is that so much of what I have experienced in my 63 odd years of this, and I grew up with this from day one in the 60s with parents who are on this conversation almost exactly, is that we have an overbalance in the intellectual, rational, engineering fix approach to this problem. And I think just recognizing that this challenge is nested right within a bigger cultural crisis of existential separation from a cosmology of who we are on this planet, how we're connected with this planet, and being accountable to our relationship with this planet. So I mentioned Hazel Henderson's in the chat, her Principles of Ethical Biomimicry Finance. And of course, you mentioned Janine's work in biomimicry. Clearly, the pathway is to get into communication in our communities. I call it in-place impact. And yes, we need top-level, top-down policy, but the real power is going to be from each of us taking that in-place impact responsibility in our own communities and spending some quiet time getting into right relationship with this planet and the cosmos that we all, depend on for our life and living. A lot more quiet time, in my opinion, would open channels of knowing that desperately are needed in this quest to find the right future for humanity, because it's way beyond an engineering fix, way beyond that. So thank you for making this conversation available.
Thank you so much, Stuart. And come back again. We talk about culture change from time to time and how planetary cultures shift over time. One of the shifts we're in now.
I cited the chapter in my book, which if anybody cares to look at it.
Put the link in the chat, please.
Okay.
Greg, over to you. I'm going to ask you to be very brief, if you would.
What's that?
It's over to you. I'm going to ask you to be very brief, please.
I'm very brief. So first of all, obviously, thank you very much for all that you do. And thank you, Hunter. This has been fascinating. I've been really inspired by Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future, and really, in some ways, obviously not a perfect roadmap, but lays out a heck of a roadmap, including the global carbon rewards and all that sort of thing. I wanted to get your reaction to what extent you see that as not just a speculative fiction novel, but something that we can really look to for what may be happening, including some of the scary eco-terrorism stuff.
Yeah, I require Ministry for the Future for my classes. It is an awesome book. Thick. A colleague of mine said he was reading it in homeopathic doses because the beginning of it is very, very grim. Mary, by the way,
Hunter, I had to start it 3 times to build up enough of a head of steam to get through those first few chapters.
Yeah. The Mary, by the way, is Mary Robinson, who I was honored to be able to spend some time with at COP. Wonderful woman. My one critique of the book is it way short-pedaled regenerative agriculture. It had lots of solutions listed. The only one it really named by name was Delton Chen's carbon coin. That's a very interesting one. But the real point to read the book is for what could well be coming at us this year, next year. It's set 20 years in the future. Yeah, no, it's not. It's now.
I doubt that they're going to go back to.
Everybody, please mute your mic.
Mute yourselves. Daniel.
Go ahead, Hunter.
I said over to Daniel. You have a new book out, which is awesome. The Value of Values. That's something everybody ought to read.
Daniel, open your mic and
I really appreciate that.
And be succinct.
Okay, so first of all, I greatly appreciate that. Thank you. The thing that I would, and Kathleen, thank you for that. I guess just 2 quick things, and I will be succinct. One is that I think it's not, we need to remember that a lot of the things that we have, capitalism and so forth, they're messed up from how they should be. It's not that we need a new thing like, something other than capitalism. As Hunter pointed out, we don't have capitalism now. And as I try to point out in my book, there's a lot of money to be made that isn't being made, which doesn't make any sense. The other thing is that it can be difficult sometimes to remember this, but I'm trying to remember the adage, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Which I think it was George Washington Carver had the original version of this quote. But that's, where we are is in a system that's crazy, but could be changed in the short run and could be really changed in the long run. And we need to do all of that.
Thanks, Daniel. And none of us get to hang up our spurs just yet. I want to thank you all for joining us. We've covered a lot, way more than I expected in this call. We started out talking about COP, and I'm not going to say much more about that. But some of the things I heard is that we know what to do. If it's, cut the subsidies, regenerative agriculture, educate women, 3 items that move a lot of the mouth in there. The future that we know is profitable, but it depends on who's counting the coins. I'm just one person, but there's 8 billion of me. So what do we do? If you're a business, you drive hard to the new world. You share value broadly with those who create value. You try capitalism, because we haven't for a long time. If your government, democracy is a good thing too. If your government, you cut the subsidies, you change the codes. If you're an individual, solar batteries and EVs for sure, but also local investment, and also food waste, and also vote, damn it, and get your friends to vote. The amount of non-voters is more than enough to shift the election in almost every jurisdiction in the country. And so this is not a time for apathy and pessimism, but get out the vote, because if the election goes one way in November, none of the things we're talking about happen. So there's that.
They happen faster because all hell breaks loose.
All hell breaks loose, and then it's pretty.
That's not the preferred route to change.
Well, it's a pretty unpredictable route to change. And remember, it's all about design. So with that, Hunter, thank you so much for taking the time out of a crazy busy schedule to be with us. So love every time we spend together. Some people have asked, the video of this call will be up probably by the end of this week, certainly by the beginning of next week. It's on my YouTube channel. I'll put that in the chat in a moment. We reconvene third Wednesday of every month. The next one is February 21st. So please join us then if you're able. Invite your friends. We'd love to expand this circle, expand the diversity of this circle. And that depends on not just us, but you all inviting people. Let's see, what do we got here? Here's the archive link. If you want to save the chat, we post the video. We do not post the chat. So if you want to save the chat, use the 3 dots to grab that, bottom or the top of your Zoom screen. And last but not least, if you want to contact Natural Logic or me, here's some links. I'm sorry for the formatting, got a little wonked here. I've got a Linktree link to give you a sense of the things that I'm up to. I didn't want to take the time away from Hunter. You got a little bit of a sense of what she's up to, but it was tip of the iceberg. There's more there. So follow her at what's best link, Hunter, to track you?
I'll put it in the chat, but www.natcapsolutions.org, natcapsolutions.org.
And publishing on Canary.
Climate and Capital Media.
Climate and Capital Media. So check out there. You can follow me on LinkedIn or Substack or our blog. I look forward to seeing you next time on the 21st. And if you haven't had a chance to talk today or post today, please get in touch directly. We'd love to hear from you, what you're doing, how we can support each other. Thank you, everybody. Ken, what's the last word from our friend Brandy?
Second. While I'm queuing that up, why don't we take Hank's? I know Hank will be quick.
Sure, go, Hank. Hank, you with us?
He has to unmute.
Yeah, I'm just unmuting myself. I also just want to express my thanks not only to you, Hunter, and you, Gil and Ken, but to all the people who put in terrific ideas in the chat. As some of you know, I'm helping to organize a conference in Iceland next month about the futures of democracies, both futures and democracies are plural. And I'll try to post something about that on some of the sites that I think you all know about. And any contributions that you all have to make to thinking about the futures of democracies are very, very welcome.
Being held in the home of the oldest democracy in the modern world.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. And here's our last advice.
But only if you're standing in the eye. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye.
Thank you, everybody. Go in peace and kick butt.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Hunter, thanks so much. It was a wonderful call.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Lots of energy.
Thank
Lots
you,
of energy.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Adios.
So
all.
long, Hunter. Good to see you.
Time, au revoir.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Gil.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Boy, some of you I didn't even see because we have too many screens of humans here.
Gil, could I ask a technical question?
Of course.
I'm clicking on the 3 dots and it only copies the one comment in text. Is there a way to copy all of them?
It
Although
should
somebody...
No, you don't click the comments. You click the 3 dots. You should have a choice that says save chat.
It might be at the top of your window or the bottom, but it'll say save chat when you click on it.
Hey, Gil, any chance you could save and distribute the chat?
Yeah, but I'm not going to distribute to everybody. So if you want the chat, send me a note.
I will, Gil. Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Those
You have
of us
my
on
email?
phones and devices doesn't work. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So Gil, if you send it to Hunter, I can get it from her.
Okay, and I'm putting my email in the chat, so you can also send me a note directly. We may change that policy. That's been our promise to people until now, so the chat can be pretty wide open. But I will get that to you.
Yeah, thank you. If you want to send it to Hunter or me, either one,
Sure.
my email's
Okay.
in.
Thanks
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Catherine, good to see you.
Thank you,
Greta.
Gil.
Harry Beaubois. Hello, sir. Been a while.
It was a great day, Gil.
I think
Great.
so. Thanks
Great
for
event.
thanks for participation, Mark.
Yep, thank you for the discussion. As Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Bye.
Come again. All right.
I
So I'll see
definitely
you in
will.
90 minutes. We got our study group coming up. And I have to go do some reading.
Oh yeah, better go. All right.
All right.
I actually
Bye.
read a physical book and highlighted it. I haven't done that in a long time.
I did that with one of the volumes and ended up just like almost every page. So I just sort of like take notes.
Yeah, there you go.
It's
Okay.
so nutrient dense.
All right.
All right.
Signing off. Alan, good to see you.
Yeah.
Best of deal. Take good
Yeah,
care.
good to see you.
Thanks for
Many
joining us.
thanks. Great